Welcome. I hope you are having a wonderful night, dear viewer. Tonight, I will be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. Make sure to leave your feedback on the comments, so I can make this the best experience for you. And if you have any stories you would like me to tell, you can send them through the link in the description. Let's begin. Story 1. I wrote this article last year when my university was asking for real experiences or encounters with ghosts. It's long, but worth the read. Trust me. I will never again touch an Ouija board. This is all real. In 2017, 5 of my friends and I moved into our new house to find we weren't the only ones living there. We'd been looking forward to moving in for almost a year. Second year meant no more cafeteria food, dons, or public bathrooms. Only 6 friends living together. We quickly made the house our home, decorating the walls and hosting a few too many housewarming parties. We felt safe, happy, and comfortable in our new place. Shortly after settling in, my housemates and I heard inexplicable sounds throughout the house. We'd hear the shower sliding door move on its own, footsteps sound from upstairs, and the front door open and close. Shortly after settling in, my housemates and I heard inexplicable sounds throughout the house. We were suspicious of the sounds, but quick to brush them off and continue with our lives. That was until the evening of Oct. 25. While all 6 of us were sitting around the dinner table, a pan on the stove began to rock back and forth on its own. We tried to play it off as normal, but nothing could explain the shaking. We decided we'd had enough. We had to get to the bottom of these strange occurrences. 10 minutes later, we lit candles and set up a homemade Ouija board in the middle of our table. To use a Ouija board, each player lightly places one finger on the planchette, a wooden triangle used for these ceremonies, and questions the room's spirits. If one is contacted successfully, the planchette moves itself around the board and spells out words or numbers to answer the questions. "Is there anyone here?" we asked the board. No response. We asked again and again, but still no response. After a couple more tries, the planchette dragged itself to the word "yes," written on a piece of paper. Once we were sure there was someone there, we continued to ask questions to find out who exactly we were talking to. "What's your name?" we asked. Slowly but surely, the planchette moved to the letters A, D, and I, until it spelt out Adisat. My housemates and I continued to communicate with him for a few minutes, until we felt we were no longer speaking to Adisat. We asked if there was another presence with us, and it turns out there was. This time, the spirit's name was Pam, a 3-year-old good spirit, according to her. Realizing there was more than one spirit with us, we asked the board how many there were in our presence. The planchette slid to number 8. With news of our 8 additional roommates in mind, we decided that was enough for one night and stopped the game. After looking up the standard conditions of using Ouija boards, my housemates and I discovered we'd broken some of rules with our first try. Ouija boards are supposed to open the connection to the spirit world, attracting and inviting spirits from all over. They shouldn't be played at home. If you play where you live and connect with a malevolent spirit, it can stay in your house. Spirits can't be trusted. A spirit can take possession of players and gain access to their mind. The next night, we decided to break out the Ouija board and play again. This time, when we asked how many spirits were with us, the answer was 27. After asking who was with us a few times, we compiled a list of names. Nudu, Verd, Lukov, Matt, and Corey, to name a few. When asking whether or not they had good intentions, Nudu was one of the few that replied, "No." I suggested asking Nudu if he'd taken possession of any of us. He answered no until it got to my housemate Emily, and the planchette quickly swiveled over to yes. We put Nudu's answer to the test by asking personal questions about Emily. Only she'd know. "How many concussions has Emily had?" I asked. The planchette made its way over to the number 4. We looked over at Emily, who had a look of horror on her face. Nudu was right. While Nudu answered the rest of our questions correctly, We couldn't rule out the fact Emily's hand was on the planchette. Maybe she was purposely or subconsciously guiding it in a certain direction. We told Emily to take her hand off the board, but stay where she was. Then we asked, "What is Emily's brother's girlfriend's last name?" None of us knew the answer. The board replied. We looked over at Emily, and she confirmed that it was the right name. We were all in disbelief. A few of my housemates decided they were done playing and lifted their fingers off the board. Without even asking a question, the planchette moved to the corner of the board. With only 3 remaining fingers on the edges of the shot glass planchette, we never could make that happen on our own. Although that was the last time we ever played Ouija. The story doesn't end there. The following weeks were bad. My housemates and I were constantly uneasy in our home and got especially nervous at night. We all felt as though we were being watched. We saw dark shadows in the corners of our rooms and suffered from horrible nightmares. Emily would often wake up in the middle of the night screaming for help, convinced she saw a figure in front of her. One night while I was lying in bed, I heard a noise coming from my window like someone running nails up and down my wooden blinds. After too many sleepless nights, we decided to hire a medium. We showed the medium around our home and told her what happened, although we didn't tell her where we felt the dark spirit. She was able to identify the exact spots we felt their presence most. When the medium described the characteristics of the spirit she sensed, it was exactly the type of presence I'd felt. We all agreed. The spirit was an adult male in his late 20s or early 30s. He was a bit of a loner. Was this Addisut? She helped us remove the presence by lighting sage and encouraging him to go towards the light. We truly felt better afterwards. I no longer saw dark shadows in the corners of my room and stopped feeling like I was being watched at night. We thought this spirit listened to us, complied with the medium's instructions, and left. About a week later, when dropping off the payment for the sessions, the medium told us something that stays with me today. The spirit she'd helped us get rid of was now following her. Although this happened almost a year ago, there's still rarely a day that goes by where I don't think about these events in one way or another. Story 2. This is a true story. My family owns a small 12-acre farm outside Calgary, Alberta. It's isolated, with no neighboring farms, houses, or stores. Just vast land. Growing up, my grandpa always made sure I helped him bring the animals inside before dark. We had a routine of locking up the barn and house every evening. A routine that seemed normal to me until I reached an age where I started sleeping over at friends' houses. That's when I realized our routine was unique. When I turned 13, I took on the responsibility of putting the animals in every night and doing the head count. We had around 12 horses and cows, so it was a manageable task in our relatively small barn. I never complained about it. However, when I was 17, my grandpa passed away, leaving us all devastated. That same year, my parents retired and moved away, leaving only me and my brother on the farm. During the first year after our grandpa's passing, we started to slack off a bit. We didn't worry as much about locking up the house and barn. Little did we know that would turn out to be a big mistake. My brother started working late, so I was often the one leaving the house unlocked. Things took a turn for the worse in August. I began hearing strange noises inside the barn, as if the animals were desperately trying to escape. I also heard footsteps around my bedroom window, distinctively human. One night, I got distracted watching TV and forgot to bring the animals in. It was pitch black when I finally realized and decided to go out and do my duty. Equipped with my phone and headlamp, I mentally prepared myself to face the darkness. Putting the cows inside was an easy task, and most of the horses had already found their way into their stalls or paddocks. I closed those gates and started walking up the hill to retrieve 3 more horses: Hailey, Ruby, and Ava. Ava, being a young horse around 2 or 3 years old, was always a handful, especially during her teenage phase. Hormonal and challenging to handle. She added to the complexity of the task. I grabbed their halters and opened the gate, feeling an unsettling chill crawling down my spine. Ruby approached me as expected, and I put her halter on while whistling for Ava. Ava came into the light, but seemed spooked. What struck me as strange was that she didn't resist when I put her halter on. I glanced at Ruby, who was fixated on something in the darkness. Her eyes glazed over, as though she had seen a ghost. She stood motionless, head held high. Ava, too, appeared disturbed. I whistled once more, expecting Haley to respond promptly, but she didn't. This was unusual, since Haley always came running at the sound of the whistle. I tied Ava and Ruby to the fence and proceeded towards the end of the paddock, feeling a growing sense of unease. As I reached the shelter, my stomach churned and I trembled involuntarily. Haley was standing motionless in the corner, not even acknowledging my presence. My heart sank as I called her name and whistled again, desperately hoping for a response. But there was nothing, no reaction, no movement. I approached her cautiously, my headlamp illuminating her face, and what I saw horrified me. Haley's eye was missing, and a large chunk was torn from her cheek, exposing her teeth. Shocked and disturbed, I instinctively took a step back, my mind racing. Then, without thinking, I sprinted down the paddock. Unlocking the gate, I untied the horses and glanced behind me, fearing what I might see. There was nothing there, just an eerie emptiness. Holding the horses close, we raced down the hill and sought refuge in the safety of the barn. I closed the doors behind us, secured the horses in their stalls, and locked up. I hurried to the house, grabbing my shotgun in the process. I couldn't bear the thought of Haley suffering. With trembling hands, I made my way back up the hill and into the paddock. Each step felt agonizingly slow, and the weight of the situation pressed upon me. I cautiously circled the shelter, but Haley was nowhere to be seen. I called out her name repeatedly, my voice filled with desperation, but there was only silence. I ran around the paddock, desperately hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but there was nothing. Exhausted and overwhelmed, I dashed back down the hill and barricaded myself inside the house, locking every door and window. That night, sleep eluded me entirely. I remained haunted by the image of Haley, her missing eye and mutilated cheek. To this day, I still don't know what happened to her. In the aftermath, I found a new farm and began the process of relocating the animals. I refused to stay at that place, forever haunted by the disturbing events and the unanswered questions. Story 3. Before I start this story, I'd just like to let you all know that I'm predominantly a skeptic, or at least I was until this house. I actually rarely talk about the events that happened in there, because I don't have any rational explanation, but that house has stuck with me well into adulthood. Back in 2009, my mom and my stepdad moved into a really old, rustic rural cottage in England. My father had passed away not too long before, and this was going to be a new start for us all. The house was an absolute bargain. It had 6 bedrooms, 2 very spacious living rooms, and a huge annex at the back that was essentially a second house. We couldn't work out why it was so cheap. We went for the viewing, and the family eventually told us that their elderly mother had passed away there peacefully in the annex, and they just needed to get away from the feeling of her. We weren't put off, and we bought the house. From the off, it was unsettling. My parents didn't see it at first, but I was incredibly uncomfortable there. It was extremely unnerving and cold, and not to mention, it was isolated behind rows of trees and a very long driveway, so far away from anyone else. It started on the first night. My room was at the end of the corridor, and if you came out of my room, on the right was a bathroom and a locked door that led into the annex, the place where the elderly mother died. My parents slept a long way down the corridor in the last bedrooms, so I was quite isolated, and directly opposite my room were the stairs. This first night, it was freakishly cold. I pulled my blankets up to my head, but after my dad passed away, I'd suffered from insomnia for years. So the cold and the anxieties of moving to a new house all added together with this into zero sleep. So I ended up laying awake for hours just sort of staring around the room. My bedroom door was one of those old and mismatched wooden country house doors. It didn't quite reach the carpets, and after a few hours, I could hear the creaking of floorboards directly outside my room, and shadows that seemed even darker than the darkness of the hallway walking past my door. I presumed one of my parents had gotten up to use the bathroom at first, but this went on back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for several minutes, and it was fast, a very brisk walk, and not to mention, next to my door was the locked door to the annex. Anybody walking at that speed would have hit the door, but nothing. It freaked me out and had me dreading the next night. This kept happening every night for a few weeks, and I remember vividly one night I actually left my bedroom door open. Around the same time, I heard the creaking. I turned around and unmistakably there was a figure, blacker than black, walking forward and backwards in front of the door, just visible in the darkness of the hallway. I couldn't take my eyes off it the entire time it was there. It's safe to say I never slept with the door open again after that night. But this is where things start to get properly creepy. I'd been terrified of the shadow for weeks now. There was a really horrible feeling I had around it, like it was after me. And one night, as I was going downstairs for dinner, I had the same cold feeling, and for just a second, I froze in place in the dark hallway and looked to my right towards the annex door. And there, sure as anything, and without my sleepy eyes to blame it on, I saw the same black shadow walking directly at me at high speed. I ran downstairs as quickly as I could and told my parents everything. They mostly laughed it off and didn't believe me, and tried to reassure me that ghosts aren't real, and there was no chance of anything about this old lady still being in the house. Now, a bit of backstory. This old lady was terrified of the previous owner's family dog. So much so that they had installed a pulley system in the house so she could pull a cord from her bedroom that would trigger an old bell to ring in the kitchen if she wanted anything. The whole system was still there when we moved in, and this night I was awoken at around 2:30 a.m. by this bell in the kitchen ringing, loud and on repeat, like it was being pulled firmly and constantly. I ran out into the corridor, and my parents were there too, equally as confused and concerned as I was. We all looked at each other with ever-increasing worry and ran downstairs into the kitchen to see what was going on. As soon as we entered the kitchen, it stopped. We ventured up into the annex to see what could have caused this, but nothing. No sign of anyone. And my God, I hated it there. It was even colder and more lifeless than the main part of the house, and I just felt like I needed to leave as soon as I could. My parents didn't quite believe that this was a ghost yet, but they were clearly less skeptical than before. From here, any activity became much more obvious. We, my parents included, started to hear knocking from the annex door next to my bedroom. Noises from downstairs that sounded like someone was down there moving. Sometimes my fish tank light would flick on and off with an audible click and wake me up. And I would often even wake up to my wardrobe, doors being wide open with no breeze in sight. One night, I was sat reading alone in my room, and one of these wardrobe doors opened by itself wide and with relative force. I got up cautiously, closed it, and ran downstairs to see my parents. When I came up around 15 minutes later, every single cupboard door, around a dozen of them, were open as wide as they would go. Lots more went on too. Taps turning themselves on became a particularly regular occurrence. And one night, I awoke to the sound of my cupboard door opening again and saw droplets of water running from the bathroom next to the annex door all the way to a few feet from my bed, with no droplets out. Again, I was terrified. It was around 6 months after all of this started that we eventually moved out. My grandma had begun to grow unwell and couldn't care for herself anymore, and she moved in with us. From the beginning, she hated the house. My grandma was so incredibly sweet and calm, and I'd never seen her distressed like she was there. And on one night in particular, when I was sat downstairs in the kitchen with her, she took my hand, pointed directly towards the annex, and said, "Don't you go in there. I don't like it in there." It's safe to say, this scared the crap out of me. On the last night we all spent together in that house, I was awoken by my mom screaming. Clear as day, she said she felt two hands firmly grab her ankles over the bed sheets and pull her down the bed, just a few inches. And right there and then, she asked to leave. We went to stay in our old house for a while. But because of size, my stepdad, the biggest skeptic amongst us, stayed in Lilac Cottage for a few more months. He's still quiet to this day about that house. But even he admits that there was something incredibly wrong there. And without much warning, he put the house up for sale, selling it so desperately that he lost almost a quarter of the price he paid for it. He's never told us why. I've promised myself that one day I'll reach out to the current owners of that house and see if they have also experienced anything. But I haven't just yet.